Marshall Peak, Chapter 59:18, Turtle Hiding in Its Shell. Marshall Peak, in response to Xiang Shan's question, Yang Kai explained, "This technique requires a suitable vessel, so it wasn't possible for me to do so at the time. A universe fragment, or universe world that had been refined into a world bead, was one such suitable vessel. The Black Ink clan had destroyed essentially all suitable bodies in the 3,000 worlds during their many millennia of occupation, so they were unsuitable for him to use in such a situation. He did have a few world beads from the myriad monsters' territory, but those were meant as rations for Ada and Aer." Xiang Shan nodded in understanding as he carefully put away the world bead that contained the entire Blood Flame army. Yang Kai was already refining the second one, and soon turned the various universe fragments, each with one of the 12 armies on it, into world beads, and gave them to the appropriate Ninth Order masters for safekeeping. Finally, Pure Yang Pass was the only object remaining outside the no-return pass. The Supreme Headquarters staff gathered in the central square with the two giant spirit gods who shrank themselves down. Once Yang Kai used his space-time river to envelope and refine Pure Yang Pass into a type of world bead, all that was left of the Grand Army was a group of Ninth Order masters. Mi Jingluan turned around and gazed in the direction of the no-return pass as he called out, "Those of you who remain in the no-return pass must do your best to safeguard the entrance to the 3,000 worlds. If the army returns one day, it will be in glorious triumph. If, however," he paused, "if you receive unfavorable news from the front lines, seal the territory gate, return to the 3,000 worlds, and make the necessary preparations." Though the majority of the army was setting out, there were still some who remained at the no-return pass to stand guard. After all, this was the primary territory gate that led to the 3,000 worlds. They could not leave it undefended. Nevertheless, the ones who stayed back were the ones who had been severely injured during the previous battle. Every single one of them sported grave injuries, from severed limbs to damaged small universes. There were only a few tens of thousands of them. When Mi Jingluan gave the order for them to remain at the no-return pass, their protests made it all the way to the Supreme Headquarters. Despite their injuries, they were still fueled by their desire to slaughter the enemy, and even though they were not as strong as they once were, they were willing to fight to the bitter end. Mi Jingluan had to spend a lot of time persuading them with both reason and emotion until they finally agreed to watch over the territory gate. It was always wise to plan for all possibilities. Although they were able to kill off seemingly all of the Black Ink clan army, when they besieged the no-return pass, there were bound to be some who managed to slip past them due to the vastness of the battlefield. While these remnants of the Black Ink clan army might not be all that powerful, they could still wreak havoc on the humans who remained behind in the 3,000 worlds if they were given free rein. Furthermore, the ones who stayed behind were not all powerful masters. It was for this very reason that Yang Kai left behind a sealing secret technique. If the humans fell in the coming battle, the ones who remained at the no-return pass were to retreat and use the sealing secret technique he left to permanently close the territory gate. Once that was done, the 3,000 worlds would no longer be connected to the Black Ink battlefield. Only a very large number of pseudo-royal lords or royal lords would be able to break the sealing secret technique Yang Kai left behind. If that many powerful masters from the Black Ink clan did return to the no-return pass, it meant that the human army had lost, which would also mean the end of the human race. Once Mi Jingluan finished giving his instructions, those who were to remain behind cupped their fists and chorused, "Yes, sir." The Ninth Order masters took one last look at the no-return pass. Their eyes flitted over the territory gate that led back to the 3,000 worlds before they hardened their hearts and abandoned all wistfulness as they headed deeper into the void. No one knew how many of them would make it back alive. Behind them, a loud voice bellowed out from the no-return pass, "May your valiant efforts be rewarded and your return victorious." The other voices rang out in unison, "May your valiant efforts be rewarded and you'll return victorious. With the help of the universe temples and space arrays that the Void Guard had set up beforehand, the 39th Order Masters took only a few days to traverse across the vast void and arrive at the boundary between the Black Ink battlefield and the late Ancient Era battlefield. They had made their calculations beforehand and gathered at the last of the universe temples, where they convened with the Void Guard, who were standing guard here. They wanted to hear the reports regarding the situation further ahead. Soon, the Void Guard finished reporting everything they knew. After taking it all in, Yang Kai said, "That means the Black Ink clan's reinforcements plan on ambushing us on the late Ancient Era battlefield." The Void Guard who spoke nodded and added, "That seems to be their plan. During the final battle at the No Return Pass half a year ago, the reinforcement army that had been rushing over suddenly stopped. We didn't know what happened at the time, but later on, we figured that they must have received word from the No Return Pass." Mi Jingluan nodded. Before Mo Na Yi died, he was still busy sending out dispatches. He must have been the one who arranged this. After Yang Kai killed Mo Na Yi with his spear, Mi Jingluan retrieved a small black ink nest from Mo Na Yi's hand. It was clear that the latter had been using the power of the black ink nest to send messages to the reinforcements. It's all clear now. The Black Ink clan's reinforcements realized that their existence had been exposed and that the No Return Pass had been seized. So, in compliance with Mo Na Yi's arrangements, they found a suitable battlefield to lay in wait to attack us, but they would not have expected us to arrive this quickly. Considering the pace of a regular army, it would take the humans about a decade to cross such a distance, even if they left as soon as they emerged victorious at the No Return Pass. By then, no matter how strong the human race Grand Army was, they would still be exhausted from traveling and caught off guard by the Black Ink clan's well-prepared ambush. However, the human race only spent half a year recuperating after taking back the No Return Pass before reaching this place a couple of days later. It had indeed been a wise decision to form the Void Guard, as they managed to help the humans avoid a catastrophic situation. This was their chance to make use of the intel they had while their opponents remained in the dark. After mulling it over in silence, Yang Kai raised his head and said, "Senior brother, all of you can rest here for now. I'll go on ahead and scout the situation." Mi Jingluan nodded. "We will have to trouble you with that. Junior brother." A Void Guard swiftly stepped forward with a space beacon which Yang Kai took and channeled his power into. Once the space beacon flashed, Yang Kai disappeared. The next instant, he appeared somewhere in the void. There was a figure beside him. It was Li Wu Yi, who was in charge of tracking the movements of the Black Ink clan reinforcements. This was the same way Yang Kai dropped in on Li Wu the last time. Li Wu Yi let out a small exhale of relief when he spotted Yang Kai. He did feel rather pressured by his task of keeping an eye on things alone, but thanks to Yang Kai's presence, he now felt as if some weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Did we retake the No Return Pass?" Li Wu Yi asked. Even though Li Wu Yi received the news about the results of the battle at the No Return Pass, he could not resist checking anyway. Indeed, Yang Kai nodded. "That's good to hear." Li Wu Yi smiled at the confirmation, but soon his expression turned grim as he asked quietly, "The casualties? Not as bad as it could have been. It is still bearable for us." Li Wu Yi nodded without asking any further. All he would get was a cold, emotionless number, but every single number represented the sacrifice of a person. The price of war was far too heavy. "How are things over there?" Yang Kai looked out in front of him, but to his puzzlement, he did not see any sign of the Black Ink clan's reinforcements. "I knew you were coming, so I retreated a little to avoid letting them sense anything. You can't see them from here," Li Wu Yi explained. "They stopped moving half a year ago. Since then, they've been preparing themselves and building defensive structures." "Defensive structures?" Yang Kai raised his eyebrows in surprise. Li Wu Yi nodded. They dragged over many of the lifeless universe worlds and fragments to act as barriers. It seems to me that they intend to build up a base. It sounds as if they plan on having a full-on confrontation with us instead of ambushing us, Yang Kai thoughtfully mused. That's very much within their means. Li Wuyi's expression was grim. There were several hundred pseudo-royal lords and over 10 million high-rank or higher black ink clansmen. Even though they don't have any true royal lords or black ink giant spirit gods with them, they are still a force to be reckoned with. It's undoubtedly Mo Na Ye's doing, Yang Kai remarked in realization. Their goal was never to stop our crusade. They simply hope to weaken us. As long as we've been weakened enough, continuing with the crusade will become meaningless. Thus, instead of trying to set up an ambush, they are better off fighting an all-out battle. They probably want us to discover their tracks. Li Wuyi gave it some thought before nodding in agreement. That seems to be the case. How vigilant are they? Yang Kai checked. Only somewhat, I'd say, Li Wuyi replied. They don't seem to expect us to arrive anytime soon, so they haven't sent out scouts or set up any strict patrols. Furthermore, the scouts they have deployed are only monitoring a small area. Still, it's enough to stop me from getting too close. 6 months ago, Li Wuyi had been able to observe the Black Ink clan army from up close, but ever since they began setting up their base, he had to stay further back to avoid detection. I'll go and take a look, Yang Kai said. After confirming the direction, he shot off into the void. Though he did not discover any true royal lords the last time he checked, there was no harm in being cautious. It was best to do a thorough check once more, as inaccurate information could very well lead to unnecessary casualties in battle. After traveling for a while, Yang Kai caught sight of the Black Ink clan army. He used Thunder Shadow's innate divine ability to mask his figure and aura as he continued making his approach. It was just as Li Wuyi had said. The Black Ink clan army was building a base here. They dragged many universe worlds and fragments from all over the void to create barriers and barricades in an otherwise empty territory. This area was still a part of the Late Ancient Era battlefield. During the Late Ancient Era, the humans and the Black Ink clan fought fiercely on this vast expanse. Countless great experts died in battle, leaving behind numerous traps in the form of barriers, seals, and restrictions. There were even divine abilities and secret techniques that had yet to be used up. These were all things that the Black Ink clan could use to their advantage. Yang Kai scrutinized the surroundings as he made his way closer to the Black Ink clan's reinforcement army. Soon he arrived at the nearest spot he could reach and began studying the Black Ink clan's reinforcement army closely. Once he was certain that they did not have any true royal lords amongst them, his worries eased. Though they were a sizable force and powerful as well, their lack of military intelligence when compared to what the humans knew made them little more than turtles hiding in their shells. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5919. Without warning, Marshall Peak around half a day later. Yang Kai returned to the Universe Temple and the Ninth Order Masters gathered around him to get an update. Once Yang Kai filled them in on everything he witnessed, Mi Jingluan nodded. It's fairly similar to what we expected. In that case, should we proceed according to plan? Xiang Shan asked. Mi Jingluan turned to Yang Kai. What do you think, junior brother? It won't be a problem, Yang Kai answered. Mi Jingluan's expression was serious as he declared, let's stick to the plan then. Soon, everyone left the Universe Temple, save for 2 void guards who remained behind to stand guard there. After a day's worth of traveling, they arrived in a part of the void that was neither too far nor too near the base of the Black Ink clan's reinforcements. Yang Kai held his hand out to Xiang Shan, who brought out the world bead he had been keeping with him the whole time. Space Principle surged as Yang Kai's hands moved swiftly. He gently patted the world bead before tossing it into the void. Once the tiny world bead left Yang Kai's grasp, it started expanding at great speed. It looked as if a stone had been tossed into a calm lake, causing ripples to spread out in all directions. In just a few moments, the world bead had been restored to its original form, and on the lifeless universe fragment, the Blood Flame Army was busy preparing themselves. Senior Brother Xiang, I'll leave things here to you and Junior Brother Sun, Yang Kai said. Xiang Shan nodded in response, as did Sun Ku, one of the new Ninth Order Masters. You all will remain here as well, and cooperate with me later when we strike. Yang Kai spoke to a few members of the Void Guard accompanying them. Yes, sir, they quickly replied. Let's go to the next spot. Yang Kai called out as he led the rest of the Ninth Order Masters and Void Guard onwards. Yang Kai kept releasing world beads at specific spots and leaving each of the human race armies there. This carried on for a couple of days until everything was in place. They were done with all their preparations. The last army to be released was the Profound Nether Army, which presently had 3 Ninth Order Masters among their ranks. One was Ouyang Lai, a more seasoned Ninth Order Master, while the other 2 were newly promoted with a lot of room for growth. The atmosphere was tense as the army stood ready for battle. Ouyang Lai was in the lead, his eyes closed. Approximately a quarter hour later, the time that had been agreed upon earlier arrived. Ouyang Lai whipped his eyes open, raised his hand, and shot off. The Profound Nether Army that had been waiting eagerly for this moment heard him roar, "Charge!" This scene played out in 12 different areas of the Void, as the 12 armies marched on the enemy from 12 different directions at the same time, heading straight towards the Black Ink Clan reinforcements base. No sound was made, but their steely resolve and murderous intent permeated the Void, causing space itself to shudder in their presence. Meanwhile, Yang Kai was hovering above the base with his eyes closed as he quietly counted down. The base was made up of over 100 universe fragments and worlds that had been gathered together. The Black Ink Clan had gone through painstaking efforts to drag all of these over from the neighboring areas of the Void to use as a defense line. Some of the pseudo-royal lords were gathered in a corner of the base, communicating via divine sense, their expressions grim as they were worried about the future. This could not be helped. 6 months ago, they suddenly received word from the No-Return Pass that the humans had launched a frenzied, all-out attack. Not only did they lose one of the Supreme One's soul clones in the battle, but the entire Black Ink Clan army there had been routed and was at risk of being annihilated. They had no way of knowing the outcome of the battle as they stopped receiving updates from the No-Return Pass after the Royal Lord, named Mo Na Yi, transmitted some final information to them. Nevertheless, they could hazard a guess that the Black Ink Clan at the No-Return Pass must have met their doom and all the Black Ink nests were destroyed. If that was not the case, it was impossible for them to not get any further news. Initially, they stormed out of the Primordial Heaven's Source Grand Restriction to help the Black Ink Clan army at the No-Return Pass, but now that the humans had captured it, was there any point in heading over as reinforcements? In the end, they chose to follow Mo Na Ye's directions. They remained in place to await the arrival of the human race army, with the intent to block their path. The human race army was so powerful that they could even slaughter a soul clone of the Supreme One. Thus, the reinforcements knew they would surely lose any war they fought against them, but they had no choice. Fortunately, they were quite a distance away from the No-Return Pass, and thus had sufficient time to prepare for the confrontation. Just as the pseudo-royal lords were in the middle of their discussion, though, a feudal lord flew over and stood by the side as he greeted them. "What is it?" A pseudo-royal lord that looked like a giant spider turned to him and asked. It was an extremely peculiar sight, as the spider-like pseudo-royal lord had a human face. However, the Black Ink Clan came in all manner of strange and peculiar forms, so he was not unique by any means. "I have something to report, sirs," the feudal lord respectfully said. "Go on." It was a pseudo-royal lord who looked like a small giant with 4 arms who spoke this time. The feudal lord swiftly reported his findings. It did not count as anything serious. A few of the teams who had been sent out to collect resources should have returned as early as 2 weeks ago, but had failed to show up, and now even the scouts sent out to check on them could not be contacted anymore. After hearing the reports, the spider-like pseudo-royal lord frowned and snapped, "You don't need to interrupt us with such inconsequential matters. Just send out a few more scouts to investigate." They were on the late ancient era battlefield where there were a myriad of powerful traps in the form of barriers, seals, and restrictions left in the void. Many of their mining teams and scouts had already gone missing as well prior to this news, so the pseudo-royal lords did not pay much attention to these things. Therefore, they ignored the feudal lord's concerns. The feudal lord had more to say, but in the end, he feared the pseudo-royal lords too much to continue, so he respectfully took his leave. He could only do as the pseudo-royal lord had commanded. So once he got back, he sent out a few more scouts and instructed them to investigate the places where the previous teams had gone missing, though he still felt uneasy. Even though there had been instances where their scouts or teams in charge of collecting resources went missing in the past, it happened far less frequently than it did recently. At the same time, Yang Kai, who was hidden above the base, slowly opened his eyes. "It's time." Yang Kai looked down at the base, and the universe fragments filled with the resting Black Ink clan army. Then he opened his palm. The space-time river was circling atop his palm, like a snake biting its tail, and in the middle of it was a piece of the void that had been cut out. A tiny great pass was sealed up inside that piece of the void, and two figures sat cross-legged inside of it. They looked quite adorable in their miniature state. As Yang Kai looked at them, the two figures noticed his gaze and looked up at him before rising to their feet. Yang Kai nodded lightly at them before flicking his hand, causing the space-time river to fly out. In a similar fashion to what had happened when Yang Kai released the world beads, the space-time river began rapidly expanding the moment it left Yang Kai's grip. The sudden commotion instantly drew the attention of all from the Black Ink clansmen. The pseudo-royal lords, territory lords, and feudal lords all sensed that something was happening and quickly looked up. The sight they saw shocked them to no end. A large river appeared out of nowhere and rapidly expanded until a massive great pass appeared before their eyes. A pseudo-royal lord saw the characters etched into the great pass and had to rub his eyes before taking another look to ensure he was not hallucinating. Pyongyang Pass. They had never seen Pyongyang Pass before, but the intelligence Mo Na-yi sent them before he died mentioned the existence of such a great pass. It was the only great pass the humans had right now, and had greatly contributed to their invasion of the no-return pass. Why would Pyongyang Pass be here? And why does that strange river that cuts across the void look so familiar? After giving it some thought, isn't that great river the exclusive divine ability of Yang Kai, the killing star from the human race? They were gobsmacked by the sudden turn of events and had not figured out what was happening, but there were always going to be smarter ones in their midst. As such, a voice soon roared so loudly that it echoed in the void. "The humans have come. We're under attack." That was enough to shock all from the Black Ink clan into action. Although they did not know how the humans managed to arrive so soon, now was not the time for them to dwell on this conundrum. However, before they could do anything, the massive Pyongyang Pass came crashing down on the universe fragments in the center of their base. Technically, Pyongyang Pass was many times smaller than even a single universe fragment, but when the two met, it was the universe fragments that exploded into pieces. It looked as if someone used a hammer on a watermelon. The sudden, forceful attack turned the first universe fragment into shattered pieces, and the Black Ink clansmen atop it were thrown into chaos. The unlucky ones were killed upon impact, but most of them were stumbling around and coughing up blood, as they had been heavily injured in the collision. Only those who were at least a feudal lord could survive the fallout of such a collision. At least 100,000 high-rank Black Ink clan soldiers died from just this attack alone, and it was only the beginning. Without the humans to wield the strength of Pyongyang Pass to its maximum, It was simply an inanimate object that could not do much. However, just as pure Yang Pass smashed that universe fragment to pieces, two figures shot up and swiftly expanded. They instantly turned into giant silhouettes that flanked the Great Pass on either side. The immense pressure that emanated from the enormous figures made the Black Ink clan feel as if their souls were shaking and chills ran down their spines. Giant spirit gods. Terror-stricken screams rang out from all directions. None of them expected to see a giant spirit god suddenly appear amidst their ranks, let alone two. Pure Yang Pass, which was supposed to be back at the No Return Pass, had shown up here, and two giant spirit gods came with it. The pseudo-royal lords could not fathom how the humans managed to cross such a vast distance in such a short amount of time, or how they managed to ensure that the Black Ink clan was completely blindsided by this sudden, fearsome attack. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 59:20. In full force, Marshall Peak's secret techniques shot out at the two giant spirit gods from all directions as the Black Ink clan reacted instinctively while in panic. Thus, Ada and Aer had only just resumed their original forms, but they were already under fierce attack. Roared as fury colored his simple, honest face. Didn't do anything. Just showed up here, but everyone is attacking Ada. Ada knew the Black Ink clan was bad. His roar seemed to form an invisible wall that blocked all the secret techniques from the Black Ink clan, and in the very next moment, he stepped towards them. Though his massive size made his movement seem rather clumsy, one step was all it took for him to reach the nearest universe fragment where he threw out his fist. Ada was much bigger than pure Yang Pass, almost the same size as the universe fragment in front of him. So when his fist struck, the Black Ink clansmen who were hit directly instantly vaporized, regardless of how powerful they were. There had even been a pseudo-royal lord present, yet he did not manage to escape this fate. Pseudo-royal lords were undeniably strong, but they were still ants compared to a giant spirit god's fist. Countless others died as well. Da's blow created a huge crater initially, and as the force of his punch reverberated out, the entire universe fragment soon exploded into dust. The Black Ink clansmen cried out as they tried to escape, but they were still affected by the shockwave of Da's punch and were now either heavily injured or at least dazed, making their struggles almost futile. An eighth order master could destroy a universe fragment with a single punch, but there was still an enormous difference in destructive force when compared to a giant spirit god. This was the strength of a giant spirit god. Right now, apart from Mo, whose power remained enigmatic to all, the giant spirit god clan were the most powerful beings fighting in this war. Although they were not proficient in the use of secret techniques or divine abilities, and seemed to be of lower sentience in some ways, they had immense strength. While Ada was busy destroying that universe fragment, Aer did not stand around idly either. He charged at the defensive barrier the Black Ink clan had worked so hard to create, and with each kick or punch he landed, lands were destroyed, and countless Black Ink clan soldiers died. In just a few breaths of time, the void was littered with broken universe fragments and Black Ink strength that had leaked out of the dead Black Ink clan soldiers. It was only then that the pseudo-royal lords managed to recover themselves and take action, ordering their armies to try and stop the two giant spirit gods. Soon, their attacks started taking effect. Although giant spirit gods were terrifyingly powerful, there were only two of them, and their enormous size made them easy targets. The Black Ink clan reinforcements numbered over 10 million, and as long as they properly coordinated, their combined strength could not be underestimated. The attacks poured in from all directions. Ada and Aer's silhouettes began to look a little unsteady, and they could not move as freely either, but that only served to infuriate them even more. When the human race army attacked the No Return Pass, they were able to kill the second Black Ink giant spirit god by gathering all their strength together. The Black Ink clan would probably be able to accomplish the same feat if they could group up and arrange themselves the way the humans had. Though it had to be said that the black ink giant spirit god the humans killed had already been through an intense battle with Ada and Aer, and thus was already seriously injured. Furthermore, its movement had been restricted as well, and it could not dodge the combined assault from the human race army. Even a black ink giant spirit god could not withstand that level of bombardment. Ada and Aer's situation was a lot better than that black ink giant spirit gods. Though the black ink clan kept attacking from all directions, the two giant spirit gods would not be in any mortal danger if the black ink clan failed to unleash a combined assault that was strong enough to overpower them in one blow. However, considering the heritage of the black ink clan reinforcements, it was within their means to force Ada and Aer to retreat if they were willing to make some sacrifices. That would only be possible if nothing unexpected happened, however, and alas, it soon did. All of a sudden, those on the battlefield detected the fall of a pseudo-royal lord. An intense fight had broken out on the battlefield, and the death of a pseudo-royal lord was not something surprising. The unluckiest of them all had died from the giant spirit god's first strike. However, what caught the Black Ink clan's attention was the fact that the pseudo-royal lord, who just died, did so a great distance away from the giant spirit gods at a place that did not seem to be under attack. Furthermore, even if the fallout from the giant spirit god's blows had managed to travel that far, how was it possible for a pseudo-royal lord to not be able to block that level of attack? Before the Black Ink clan managed to figure out what had just happened, the aura of yet another pseudo-royal lord vanished. A third and a fourth soon followed. At last, the pseudo-royal lords realized the situation they had on their hands, apart from the two giant spirit gods. There was also a third master they did not know about who was lurking on the battlefield and assassinating the pseudo-royal lords. The pseudo-royal lords were alarmed. "It's Yonkai. He's here," one of the smarter pseudo-royal lords roared. A strange river had cut through the void when Pure Yang Pass, and the two giant spirit gods abruptly appeared, and several of the pseudo-royal lords recognized what it was. According to the information Mo Na Yi provided before his death, the river was made out of Tao strengths and belonged to Yang Kai, the Killing Star. He was the most powerful Ninth Order master, and the one that Mo Na Yi warned them to guard against, for he was an even bigger threat to the Black Ink clan than the giant spirit gods. When the pseudo-royal lords in the reinforcement army heard this report, they found it hard to believe that a lone human, no matter how strong, would pose an even bigger threat to the Black Ink clan than the giant spirit gods. Nevertheless, Mo Na Yi was a true royal lord, and they had to pay serious attention to the last warning he gave them just before he died. It was only now that the pseudo-royal lords realized Mo Na Yi could have been right. Though the giant spirit gods were powerful, they were extremely overt in the way they did things. It was much easier to guard against a spear in the light than an arrow in the dark. As soon as that pseudo-royal lord's roar rang out, it was followed by an agonizing shriek. The Black Ink clan were drawn by his cries and quickly looked over, only to find a silhouette fading away behind the pseudo-royal lord, who was now sporting a large hole in his chest. Dao's strength surged from his wound and ate away at his vitality. "Don't let him escape," a pseudo-royal lord yelled as he unleashed his aura and smashed it towards that part of the void. Many pseudo-royal lords jumped into action and followed suit. Space rippled, and a silhouette which was about to completely fade away reappeared once more. It was a human who had a long spear in his hand. He looked perfectly at ease despite being surrounded by his enemies. "You've got pretty quick reflexes," the human coolly remarked, but the pseudo-royal lords did not hear any semblance of a complimentary tone in his voice. "Quick, keep him occupied." The pseudo-royal lord who shouted earlier was smarter than the others and knew that this was a rare opportunity for them. If they allowed Yong-kai to hide once more, even more of their masters would meet their doom. Their best option now was to pin him down and stop him from finding a chance to sneak up on any other pseudo-royal lords. The pseudo-royal lords nearest to Yong-kai swiftly lunged at him from their respective directions, trying to gang up on him. They attacked as speedily as they could in an impressive display of cooperation for the frantic state they were in. If it had been any other Ninth Order master, they would have been caught in a difficult battle. However, Yong-kai's expression remained indifferent as he made a grabbing motion, and Dao's strengths rippled in the air as the sound of water echoed. He summoned his space-time river, and it snaked around him like a whip. The pseudo-royal lords who were charging at him were taken by surprise and ended up plunging into the river, just like children who drown by a sudden surge of water. They struggled on the surface of the river for a few moments before sinking in and disappearing. The river grew fierce as Dao's strength surged. A few figures could vaguely be seen inside the river, clearly fighting for their lives. Soon, the commotion died down. Yong-kai flicked his wrist, and a few figures flew out of the river. When the Black Ink clan saw this, their hearts sank and their expressions hardened. The figures that fell out were the pseudo-royal lords who had been swept up just now, but they were all now covered in mortal wounds, and their auras had vanished. All it took was a few moments, and all those pseudo-royal lords had been killed. It was an unbelievable display of power. The pseudo-royal lords who were still charging towards Yong-kai immediately halted, thanking the Supreme One for being further away, as they had not been dragged into the strange river. Otherwise, they would have numbered among the dead pseudo-royal lords as well. All of the pseudo-royal lords began to hesitate. Although all the information from Mo Na-yi about Yong-kai had warned them not to underestimate him, none of them had imagined he would be this terrifying. Good. The pseudo-royal lords were terrified and uncertain, but Yong-kai felt spirited. He had been hiding his true strength all these years, which meant he could not unleash his full power whenever he joined the attacks on the No-Return Pass, and he hated every moment of it. Even though he no longer tried to conceal his ability during the last battle, he had been facing off against a Black Ink giant spirit god, and he did not manage to have a true face-off with it, so he did not get to experience the rush of displaying his full strength. He killed Mo Na-yi by concealing himself with the help of Thunder Shadow's divine ability, and ever since then, he had been patiently waiting. Until today, the death of these pseudo-royal lords enabled him to see just how much stronger he had become. In the past, whenever he used the space-time river, Yong-kai was able to capture multiple pseudo-royal lords at once, but he could not kill them off so easily. He had to enter the river personally to finish off his prey. But he no longer had to do so. He now had complete control over the life and death of pseudo-royal lords who entered the space-time river. This was the change that happened when one's heritage grew stronger. It was an intoxicating feeling. Kill him. The pseudo-royal lord who gave the command was retreating as he roared. An endless stream of secret techniques shot out at Yong-kai, but they all hit nothing as his figures simply faded away. The pseudo-royal lords pushed their divine senses wildly, but they could not detect any trace of Yong-kai. The chaotic battlefield was filled with all kinds of fluctuating forces and energies, so the pseudo-royal lords completely lost track of Predator among them. Nevertheless, Yong-kai soon reappeared behind the pseudo-royal lord who had given the command, his long spear casually piercing through the latter's head. Martial Peak. Martial Peak, Chapter 59-21. Broaden your horizons. Martial Peak, when the two giant spirits gods appeared, an intense battle broke out at the Black Ink clan base. Though initially flustered and caught off guard, the Black Ink clan reinforcement army slowly regained composure and began working together to suppress the giant spirit gods. It was immensely difficult, but at least they did not become victims of an outright massacre. The giant spirit gods were beginning to show signs of injury as well. Large boulder-like objects fell from their bodies as the Black Ink Clan army kept up a continuous bombardment of attacks. The fact that the reinforcement army was able to come up with a response in such a short amount of time made it clear they were indeed elites of the Black Ink Clan. Alas, the two giant spirit gods were not what the Black Ink Clan felt most challenged by. No matter how powerful the giant spirits gods were, they were out in the open, and they could deal with them accordingly. The biggest threat, however, was the human killing star, who was hiding in the dark and could strike out with extreme lethality at any given moment. Yong Kai, the killing star, was able to move around essentially undetectable. Even the pseudo-royal lords could not track him down, and each time he appeared, at least one pseudo-royal lord would die. It was their first time clashing against an opponent like Yong Kai, but despite only a short time passing, he was already akin to a looming shadow of death that hung over all their heads. He did not attack anyone other than the pseudo-royal lords, but in just a short span, 20 such masters had died, with the surviving ones helpless to deal with him. Had it been possible, the pseudo-royal lord's best option would have been to hide among the rest of the army, but due to the drawbacks of the source fusion technique, they couldn't restrain their auras. They were like bright lights in a dark tunnel, their presence glaringly obvious to anyone despite being in a sea of over 10 million other Black Ink clansmen. They could neither defeat Yong Kai nor find him. It felt as if they had no way of overcoming this crisis. I want to know what the situation is at the primordial heavens source grand restriction. I will spare the life of the one who tells me what I wish to know. All of a sudden, the human's voice rang out on the battlefield for all the Black Ink Clan army to hear. One of the pseudo-royal lords had an abrupt change of expression as his eyes glinted, and he threw his fist towards a certain part of the void. "He's here!" He punched with all his strength, and the void shattered like a mirror, but there was nothing there. Then the pseudo-royal lord heard Yong Kai's voice sounding tauntingly next to his ear. Wrong answer. There was a flash of light as the local space solidified. The pseudo-royal lord was still in the same pose, his clenched fist extended out, but his head had been separated from his body, and black blood was now gushing out of his neck, dyeing the void black. "Does anyone else wish to speak?" Yong Kai's voice rang out again. Two pseudo-royal lords confidently unleashed attacks towards the spot where the voice came from, but as soon as they did so, Yong Kai appeared behind them and thrust his spear through their backs. Before the rest of the pseudo-royal lords could rush over, Yong Kai's silhouette disappeared once more. Maybe my previous question was a little too broad, so I'll be more specific. Has Mo woken up yet? What's the situation like with the human race army based outside the primordial heavens source grand restriction? A hot-tempered pseudo-royal lord immediately hollered, "You want to know what happened to the army over there? They're all dead, and you're next." As soon as he finished speaking, Yong Kai appeared in front of him. The pseudo-royal lord had been secretly searching for Yong Kai's location all along, but he did not expect the human to be arrogant enough to show up in this manner, so he was caught off guard. By the time he was able to react, Yong Kai's hand had flashed out and tightly gripped his forehead. The pseudo-royal lord was entirely shocked by what happened next. All at once, he felt as if his entire body was mysteriously suppressed and sealed by a strange force. Despite merely being held by the forehead, he could not fight back at all, and Yong Kai ended up whisking him off just like that. All the masters from the Black Ink Clan nearby gasped in shock and fury as they sent forth a torrent of secret techniques aimed at Yong Kai. Nevertheless, their attacks hit nothing as Yong Kai's silhouette flickered across the battlefield without ever truly solidifying in one spot. Yong Kai flitted around to avoid the Black Ink Clan's attacks, all the while holding onto the pseudo-royal lord by the latter's forehead. He eyed the pseudo-royal lord and stated matter-of-factly, "The humans have a saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all." You'll have to pay the price for not watching your tongue. Alas, the pseudo-royal lord was a rebellious fellow, so despite being subjugated, he had no intention of compromising. He sneered and screeched, "What price would you make me pay?" "Huh? It's just death. So what if you kill me? You'll never be able to stand against the Supreme One. Black ink is eternal." "Who said I'm going to kill you?" Yang Kai eyed him coolly. The pseudo-royal lord abruptly felt a thick malice engulf him, one so intense that even though he was fully prepared to die, he could not help shuddering in response. "You just came out of the primordial heavens, source grand restriction, so I'm assuming you've never experienced purifying light before. Well, I'm in a generous mood today, so I'll help you broaden your horizons." Having said that, the 2 marks on Yang Kai's hand became visible, and in the very next moment, yellow and blue light flowed out and wrapped around the pseudo-royal lord. The pseudo-royal lord immediately had a look of horror on his face. It was true that the reinforcement army had only just recently left the primordial heavens source grand restriction and had never encountered purifying light before, but they had heard of it and how it could be used to counter black ink strength. Black ink strength was able to corrupt anything and everything it touched, but the heavens were fair in all things, so no matter how strong a particular energy was, there was always something that countered it. Primordial light and darkness were both born at the dawn of the universe. Neither could exist without the other, but both also perfectly suppressed one another. The yellow and blue lights swirled together and quickly condensed into a pure white light. A sizzling sound was heard, and all at once, the pseudo-royal lord felt as if he had been tossed into a boiling pot of oil, as black ink strength gushed out of his body and evaporated as it came into contact with the purifying light. Throughout this process, the pseudo-royal lord underwent such overwhelming pain that he could not stop screaming in agony. His tormented cries echoed across the battlefield and struck fear into the hearts of all the Black Ink clansmen. The attacks on Yang Kai did not cease as the Black Ink clan continued their attempts to track him down, unleashing all their most powerful attacks wherever they suspected he might be. However, it made no difference. While Yang Kai could not hide himself while torturing the pseudo-royal lord, his masterful use of space principles allowed him to freely weave around the Black Ink clan's attacks. In fact, thanks to Yang Kai's sneak maneuvering, a sizable number of masters from the Black Ink clan ended up getting caught in friendly fire instead. As for the pseudo-royal lord that Yang Kai captured, he had nearly screamed himself hoarse as his aura continuously weakened. In the end, he could not take it anymore and growled hoarsely, "Kill me! Kill me!" He finally realized that there were fates worse than death. Yang Kai carefully adjusted the strength of purifying light and brought the pseudo-royal lord before him. "Killing you is no problem at all," he quietly said. "Just tell me what's happening at the primordial heavens source grand restriction, and you won't have to suffer this torment any longer." The pseudo-royal lord's lips quivered as he howled through his pain. "The human race army has been wiped out, and the Supreme One has woken up." Yang Kai's gaze turned cold. "Kill me! I told you what you wanted to know," the pseudo-royal lord roared hoarsely. "But what you told me differs from what I know. I'm telling you the truth. It's all true." Yang Kai did not answer. Regardless of whether or not the suppressing Black Ink army was still alive, there was no doubt that M.O. had not awakened yet. If M.O. was fully awake, the primordial heavens source grand restriction would have been shattered, and the reinforcements sent out would have been many times larger and had true royal lords leading them. Even at a time like this pseudo-royal lord still wants to try and trick me. Huh? Either he doesn't know what's happening over there, or he doesn't wish to tell me. Yang Kai sighed. He knew there was no hope of him extracting any useful information about the situation over there out of the Black Ink clan now. The reinforcements had chosen to remain in this place to put up a fight against the human race army after hearing about the situation at the No Return Pass. Thus, it was most likely that they were already prepared to die, so it was unrealistic to think he could dig out any information from them. That pseudo-royal lord was still bathing in purifying light, and his aura had now dropped precipitously. Even the aura of a high-ranked black ink clan was stronger than his now, so Yong-kai tossed him at the group of pseudo-royal lords who were swarming over as a barrage of attacks shot out at him. As the attacks exploded, the pseudo-royal lord turned into dust. Once Yong-kai's hand was free, he immediately turned around and summoned the space-time river, which came crashing down on those who were chasing after him. The long river was like a beast that devoured everything in its path as it swallowed up a group of pseudo-royal lords. Dao's strengths then surged and wiped out their vitality. Meanwhile, a group of pseudo-royal lords were standing on a certain universe fragment. They did not join the hunt against Yong-kai, and instead gathered in the distance to observe the situation. After seeing the way a single human and 2 giant spirit gods sent their entire army into upheaval, the pseudo-royal lord in command let out a long sigh before saying, "We can't lose all our forces here. Our mission is to cripple the human race army. There's no point trying to put up a fight against these 3. Based on the current strength of the Black Ink clan army, it was impossible for them to kill the 2 giant spirit gods. Certainly they could injure these 2 giant spirit gods, but once the latter felt threatened, they would simply run away, and the Black Ink clan had absolutely no way to stop them. The same applied to Yong-kai, the Killing Star. Since the Black Ink clan had no way of stopping their 3 opponents from escaping, and no way of killing them, this was an entirely futile fight that would only result in casualties on their side. The other pseudo-royal lords nodded in agreement. Give the order for some to stay behind, and keep these 3 occupied. As for the others, evacuate at once. The pseudo-royal lord quickly came to a decision. Where should we go? A pseudo-royal lord asked. The one who first spoke stayed silent for a moment before looking in the direction of the no-return pass. We'll go out and meet the human race army ourselves. At first, the rest were confused, but they soon came to a realization. This was probably their only option now. They had to clash with the human race army as soon as possible. That way, even if they all died, they would still manage to fulfill their mission. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 59-22, The Purple Feather Army Charges. Marshall Peak, the order to withdraw went out at once, and despite the chaos of the situation, the Black Ink clan army was able to maintain some semblance of order as they prepared to retreat. According to their estimates, they had to leave at least 30% of their forces behind to keep the 2 giant spirit gods and the Killing Star occupied. That was the only way they could carve out enough room for the rest of the army to leave safely and carry out their mission. This decision pained the majority of them, but they had no choice. The pseudo-royal lord who served as the commander was standing atop a universe fragment and surveying the bloody battlefield with an icy glare. Though he knew he would never get to seek vengeance himself, he still wanted to sear the Killing Star's image into the recesses of his mind. "Sir," suddenly, a feudal lord flew over and landed in front of the pseudo-royal lords to frantically report, "Sirs, we have found signs of a human race army." The pseudo-royal lords were startled. Which direction? The commanding pseudo-royal lord quickly asked. That direction. The feudal lord pointed it out. The pseudo-royal lords all turned to look, and sure enough they spotted hazy figures far off in the depths of the void. It was a great distance away, so they could not see clearly, but it was undoubtedly a human race army, a very large one. "Excellent!" The pseudo-royal lord cheered thunderously. He did not seem panicked by the sudden report. Instead, he looked pleased. Regardless of how the human race army managed to arrive in such a short amount of time, when it should have taken them over a decade to reach this place, it was precisely what the Black Ink clan hoped to see. When they left the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction, their initial mission was to aid the Black Ink clan army at the No Return Pass by attacking the humans from the rear. They wanted to sneak up on the enemy, catch the humans off guard, and slaughter them all. However, when the No Return Pass was lost, their mission changed. All they needed to do now was to fight the humans who were heading for Primordial Heaven's source grand restriction, and to stop at nothing whilst doing so. Neither the outcome nor their survival mattered. The sudden appearance of Yang Kai and the two giant spirit gods threw their initial plans into disarray, and they were forced to split their troops in two. They had to leave some behind to keep the three menaces occupied, while the others headed for the No Return Pass to confront the human race army as soon as possible. No one expected the human race army would be here already. The enemy was delivering themselves up, so after being startled for a moment, the Black Ink clansmen were filled up with a thirst for battle. The humans used the strength of their killing star and the two giant spirit gods to disrupt their position and deployments before sending in their army to launch a surprise attack. It looked as if the humans had planned all this from the start. It was perilous to face such an enemy on their terms. Still, what was there for them to fear? The Black Ink clan existed solely to sacrifice everything for the sake of the Supreme One. "Sir," yet another voice called out from the distance, and a second feudal lord joined them as he quickly reported, "Sirs, we have sighted a human race army." The pseudo-royal lord commander nodded. "I know." The feudal lord, who just came, was completely taken aback. He rushed over as soon as he received the news. So how did the pseudo-royal lords find out about it beforehand? Nevertheless, he dared not make any comments. He stood aside and glanced at the first feudal lord, but when their gazes met, they seemed to realize something. "Sir." Once again, a feudal lord rushed over from a different direction. At last, the pseudo-royal lords also realized that the situation was not as simple as they thought it was. The human race army was not coming from just one direction. Armies were rushing towards their base from all directions. They were completely surrounded. It was hard to imagine how the humans managed to achieve this. The Black Ink clan army numbered over 10 million elites, so it should have been impossible to box them in without someone noticing something earlier on. Finally, some of the pseudo-royal lords recalled the reports they had dismissed the past few days, ones about scouts and resource-gathering teams failing to return on time. From the looks of it now, the missing Black Ink clansmen must have been discovered by the humans and eliminated. They never thought that the humans could arrive here so soon, so they had been preparing for a battle to break out a decade later. That was why they were not more vigilant and failed to realize the humans were closing in on them. Those deplorable humans. The pseudo-royal lord commander exploded in rage. Even though he wanted to take on the human race armies as soon as possible, he did not welcome being plotted against this way. After thinking in silence for a moment, though, he shouted, "Pass down the order. We launch a full-scale attack in that direction." He pointed in the direction of the No Return Pass, which was also the direction the first feudal lord pointed out in his report. Although the Black Ink clan was being besieged from all directions, the one silver lining of the situation was that the human race's strength was scattered, as they had split themselves up into over 10 different forces. Even though this allowed them to surround the Black Ink clan, it also meant that the Black Ink clan could target these smaller armies individually. As long as they moved quickly enough, they had enough heritage to wipe out a few of the human race's armies. That would be enough to deal a crushing blow to the humans and force them to cut their crusade short. The Black Ink clan were already making preparations to withdraw, so after receiving the latest order from the commanding pseudo-royal lord, they instantly split into two. 30% stayed behind to keep Yang Kai and the giant spirit orders occupied, while the rest charged at the human race army that was approaching from the direction of the No Return Pass. The human race army coming from that direction was the Purple Feather Army. Wu Qing was originally the only Ninth Order Master in the Purple Feather Army, but ever since the battle at the No Return Pass, the humans had 20 new Ninth Order Masters, 2 of whom were added to the Purple Feather Army. They were a man and a woman, an actual senior brother and junior sister pair. Even if one searched the entirety of the human race's history, it was exceedingly rare to find a precedent of two such people growing so powerful together. It was hard enough to become a Ninth Order Master, as few ever had the possibility of doing so. If it had not been for the benefits gained from the World Tree clone, it would usually take several thousand, if not tens of thousands of years for someone with the aptitude to become a Ninth Order Master to appear in a great force. Thus, the years and generations that separated the Ninth Order Masters made it near impossible for two to have a senior brother and junior sister relationship. That all changed with the appearance of the star boundary. After several millennia of fighting together, this pair could basically read each other's thoughts. Even when they were still Seventh Order and Eighth Order Masters, they had already carved out a name for themselves on the battlefield, as numerous feudal and territory lords had died at their hands. They had even caught Naye's attention, as he had set up traps that were targeted specifically at them. The many years of war between the human race and the Black Ink clan gave birth to a plethora of both celebratory and sorrowful stories, but it also led to the birth of many remarkable people, and these two were ranked among them. Right now, they were standing atop a purifying Black Ink battleship together with Wu Qing, their senior, as all three were observing the battlefield. When Wu Qing saw that the Black Ink clan army had chosen to charge in their direction, his eyes flashed with displeasure. Whether it was on purpose or not, the Purple Feather Army had been singled out by the enemy as the weak point that they could easily run over. "Prepare for battle," Wu Qing loudly commanded. The Purple Feather Army that had been traveling at great speed instantly repositioned themselves. They did not take up a defensive formation, but rather an offensive one. Despite facing off against their opponents whose numbers were several times greater than their own, the Purple Feather Army showed no fear. Every single one of them was able to stay composed as they waited for the moment to strike. After going through numerous battles, both large and small, throughout the past few millennia, they had built up their spirits through their continued victories and could move as one body. The Black Ink clan army was not about to face the weak army they believed it to be, but a giant beast who could swallow everything in its path. Murderous intent flared as the distance between the two armies rapidly shrank. All at once, multicolored flashes of light shot out from the Purple Feather Army and rained down on the approaching Black Ink clan. At the same time, streaks of black secret techniques shot out from the Black Ink clan army towards the Purple Feather Army. The fight had officially begun. Scores of auras from the Black Ink clan were extinguished by the bursts of light, and even the pseudo-royal lords could not let their guard down. They were completely focused on dodging the secret techniques. In a situation like this, even a minor slip-up could spell their doom. As for the Purple Feather Army, though they suffered some losses as well, it was nothing compared to what the Black Ink clan suffered. It was not surprising, as the human race had the protection of warships and spirit arrays, while the Black Ink clan did not. In a head-on battle between two armies where secret techniques and artifacts were exchanged at long range, the side with stronger defenses had far more of an advantage. It was akin to a mortal battle where both armies had archers, but only one had shields. Naturally, the one with shields suffered far fewer casualties. In this case, the humans were the ones with the shields. Evidently, the Black Ink clan picked up on this as well. They had to withstand the constant decrease in their numbers as they tried to hasten their attacks. Since they lost out in terms of defense, they were forced to expend some of their energy to defend themselves in order to counter the humans' advantage. After a few rounds of secret techniques were exchanged, the fearsome armies finally clashed in the void. By numbers alone, the humans were certainly at a disadvantage, but they were still able to halt the Black Ink clan army's charge by force. The Purple Feather Army seemed to turn into a massive boulder, which could not be moved. No one knew how they did it, but they did. Black ink, clan bastards, suffer death. Wu Qing's bellow rang out. He was still standing atop the purifying black ink battleship when he first started speaking, but by the time he finished, he had already charged into the black ink clan army. His weapon flashed as he cut down a pseudo-royal lord before the latter could even register what was happening. Black blood splattered everywhere as a powerful aura flared up before disappearing. Countless masters from the black ink clan shuddered in fear. Though the pseudo-royal lords were resolute in their determination to sacrifice everything for the Supreme One, they still felt chills down their spine when they saw how terrifying Wu Qing was. At last, they realized that the human race did not only have Yang Kai as their solitary killing star. The Ninth Order Master in front of them now was also immensely powerful. Wu Qing was a veteran Ninth Order Master, and out of all the current Ninth Order Masters, Xiao Xiao was the only one who had more experience than him. However, Xiao Xiao was proficient in the Yin-Yang Grand Dao and specialized in crowd control rather than single combat. The same could not be said for Wu Qing. Thus, among all the Ninth Order Masters, Wu Qing was second only to Yang Kai in terms of individual combat strength. Martial Peak. Martial Peak, Chapter 59-23, surrounded. Martial Peak Wu Qing made a show of strength by channeling everything he had into the attack. A pseudo-royal lord who was caught off guard would never have been able to defend himself against it. Off to a good start. However, in the very next breath, Wu Qing was surrounded by numerous masters from the Black Ink clan. After being momentarily stunned, they swiftly rushed over to gang up on him. Wu Qing showed no fear as he slashed out around him. As Dao's strength rippled through the void, his formidable power burst out and turned his enemies into rivers of blood. The other human race masters followed in Wu Qing's footsteps as they rushed into the enemy lines, including the two new Ninth Order Masters. Their figures lunged forth as two flashes of light as they headed straight for the pseudo-royal lords. The junior sister's expression was grim as her hands swiftly moved to unleash a mysterious strength that filled the void, causing the pseudo-royal lords to instantly feel as though their souls were becoming unstable. They saw stars circling their heads, as if they had been hit by an invisible hammer. The senior brother seized this chance to close in with his sword. Sword light shrouded his body as he cut through the pseudo-royal lords. Black blood splattered as one of the pseudo-royal lords was relieved of his head while the others were heavily injured. This was all accomplished with a single strike. By the time the pseudo-royal lords who were lucky enough to survive could finally react, the senior brother's sword light was slashing down on them. Agonizing screams echoed across the battlefield of this senior brother and junior sister pair. One excelled in the soul Dao, while the other excelled in the sword Dao. Furthermore, they were able to act as one as they fought on the battlefield, which meant they could kill their enemies even more efficiently than Wu Qing, the veteran Ninth Order Master. Meanwhile, the Eighth Order Masters quickly got into their battle formations and challenged the remaining pseudo-royal lords, causing intense fights to break out in all directions. The battle was joined in an instant as the two armies fought with dogged fervor. In this battle, the human race were both advantaged and disadvantaged at the same time. One of the things working in their favor was that these pseudo-royal lords had a critical difference from the pseudo-royal lords from the No Return Pass. While they were all similarly powerful, they differed when it came to experience. The pseudo-royal lords from the No Return Pass had fought against the human race for hundreds of years at least, and with the help of the information they gleaned from Black Ink disciples, they were able to mimic the humans and even learn to form battle formations. Although they could only form a simple Three Fortunes formation, it would still require 20 to 30 Eighth Order Masters in 5 elements or 6 paths formations to contain them. That was the reason why the humans had such a hard time during the battles at the No Return Pass. Even a simple three fortunes formation had given the pseudo-royal lords a huge boost in combat efficiency and allowed them to occupy many more human masters. However, that was not the case for the pseudo-royal lords, who just came out of the primordial heavens source grand restriction. They did not know how to form battle formations, and their combat experience was quite lacking. So even though they worked together in certain situations, each of them basically acted independently, oftentimes getting in each other's way rather than providing support to one another. As soon as the clashing started, the Eighth Order Masters keenly picked up on this and were thrilled. If the Eighth Order Masters formed a 5 elements formation, they were just barely able to put up a fight against a pseudo-royal lord. A 6 paths formation would mean that they would stand on equal footing, while a 7 stars formation made them even more powerful than their opponent. As of now, the humans had quite several Eighth Order Masters. This was thanks to their steady accumulation all these years, as well as the ordinary grade innate open heaven pills from the universe furnace. Each army had at least 2,000 Eighth Order Masters. Some even had 3,000. With so many Eighth Order Masters, it was easy enough to form battle formations and contain the pseudo-royal lords. Nevertheless, when it came to sheer numbers, the Purple Feather army paled in comparison to the Black Ink clan army, as the latter had nearly 10 times as many masters. Therefore, even though the Purple Feather army was able to put up a fight for now, they could not keep it up for long. Fortunately, they did not need to. The other human armies were closing in from all directions, so all they had to do was hold out for a little longer, and their reinforcements would be able to surround the Black Ink clan completely. When the time came, the Black Ink clan would be trapped. The difference in numbers meant that the Purple Feather army suffered increasing injuries and casualties, but in comparison to them, the Black Ink clan suffered the same in far greater numbers. The 3 Ninth Order Masters weaved through the enemy as they killed pseudo-royal lords again and again. Wu Qing was covered in wounds, and the senior brother and junior sister duo had also turned pale from overexertion. The wreckage of the broken warships floated everywhere as blood and torn limbs scattered all over. Nevertheless, the Purple Feather army did not retreat. They maintained their lines and held fast to keep the enemy rooted in place. The other human armies were rushing over to provide aid from all directions, with the Ninth Order Masters in the lead, and would soon arrive. The Black Ink clan army was slowly weakening. Initially, the pseudo-royal lords figured that their numerical advantage would be enough for them to triumph over the Purple Feather army, with a high chance of them being able to wipe this human army out entirely. As long as they did so, they would be able to create a gap in the encirclement and gain a better position to battle against the other human race armies. Alas, they did not expect the Purple Feather army to be able to keep the battlefield fixed in this area despite being outnumbered nearly 10 times. Are humans really so resilient? The pseudo-royal lords were somewhat dazed. No wonder the ones who first left the primordial heavens source grand restriction couldn't exterminate the humans and were soundly defeated after years of battle. As the stalemate continued, the Black Ink clan army soon began to despair. The other human race armies had arrived, swarming over from all directions and surrounding the Black Ink clan army. An even more intense battle broke out then, as both parties numbered over 10 million now as they fought viciously. The Black Ink clan army was already weakened by the previous battle, but the humans remained spirited, so the outcome was clear. Furthermore, the humans had 29 Ninth Order Masters, while the Black Ink clan did not even have a single true royal lord. Their pseudo-royal lords did not know how to form battle formations either. Thus, the clash soon became a one-sided massacre for the Black Ink clan. Meanwhile, back at the Black Ink clan's base, where the fight first broke out, Ada and Aer were stomping about, slaughtering the Black Ink clan army in droves. Though a large number of masters from the Black Ink clan remained here to keep them occupied, they were only 30% of the whole reinforcement army, and it was hard for them to put up a fight against 2 giant spirit gods. Moreover, Yang Kai was still weaving about undetected among them as he snuck up on their masters and assassinated them. Soon, Yang Kai killed off the last of the pseudo-royal lords who had stayed behind. And without them, the Black Ink clan's attacks became little more than tickles and scratches to Ada and Aer. Since the battle had been decided, Yang Kai returned to Pure Yang Pass. The Great Pass had been floating along on the battlefield without anyone paying any attention to it after Yang Kai first let it out and sent it crashing into a universe fragment. Until now, instantly, somewhere on the Pure Yang Pass, Yang Kai's divine sense surged like gushing water, and soon he took in the situation across the void. It's the perfect time. A torrent of world force was unleashed, and a huge array lit up on the spot where Yang Kai stood. A mysterious energy burst forth in all directions. 12 universe fragments were scattered across the void outside the battlefield. These 12 universe fragments were the ones that Yang Kai brought from the no-return pass after turning them into world beads. He restored them to their original size once they arrived in this area. The 12 universe fragments were not simply tools to transport the armies, they were also a crucial part of the plan to surround the enemy. The human race army had planned all of this before they left the no-return pass. Just as Yang Kai activated the Grand Array on Pure Yang Pass, the Void Guard that remained on the 12 universe fragments did the same to the arrays that had been set up there too. All at once, the 12 universe fragments lit up brightly as they connected with Pure Yang Pass. It was incredibly difficult to harness the strength of such a huge array. Just creating it had cost an enormous amount of resources, while powering it was also not cheap, but it was all worth it for the sake of eliminating the enemy once and for all. The connection between the universe fragments and Pure Yang Pass kept growing stronger. And once Yang Kai felt it reach a certain critical limit, he surged his base principles. The Void Guard picked up on this signal and instantly followed suit. All at once, there was a visible ripple that started from Pure Yang Pass and rapidly spread out over several millions of kilometers, sweeping past the two clashing armies as it filled every corner of the void. This ripple was not deadly in any way, nor did it disrupt the two armies either. However, after it spread out, something seemed to change on the battlefield. The 12 universe fragments scattered across the void had been linked together with Pure Yang Pass to seal the entire battlefield. A massive section of the void had become a cage, and as long as the array held strong, nothing could escape. This was a massive battle involving millions of soldiers on each side. No matter who had the upper hand, it was still going to be hard to completely annihilate the other side. There were bound to be those who managed to escape. To prevent that from happening, the humans came up with a plan beforehand. If some of the Black Ink clansmen did manage to flee, they would surely be a threat to the ones left behind at the no-return pass, as only a few tens of thousands of masters had stayed back. What's more, those masters were all heavily wounded, and not as powerful as they once were. The humans were determined to slaughter every single Black Ink clansman here in one battle. Thus, Yang Kai was personally standing guard at the array core, and as long as he did not die, there was no way of lifting the sealing array. Furthermore, even as he stood guard in the middle of Pure Yang Pass, he was still able to take part in the battle. Thanks to the power of the array, Yang Kai could monitor the entire situation out on the battlefield. It was a mysterious feeling for him, as it felt as though he was observing the battle from a different dimension. Since he could see what was happening, it meant that he could partake in the battle as well. Thus, out on the battlefield, there were frequent attacks that seemed to come from out of nowhere. These attacks would smash the masters from the Black Ink clan into pieces, and many of the humans who had been caught in a perilous situation were saved, to the confusion of everyone. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 59-24. Go on ahead first. Marshall Peak, there was no suspense in this battle. The human race spent over a decade retaking the no-return pass. But the outcome of this fight against the Black Ink clan's reinforcement army had been determined right from the start. The portion of the Black Ink clan army that stayed back to keep the two giant spirit gods occupied was the first to crumble. After all of the pseudo-royal lords had been killed, there was no point in continuing a hopeless fight. Many of the surviving masters wanted to flee. Alas, the surrounding space had been sealed up, and they could not escape. They were doomed to meet their end here. On the main battlefield, the 12 armies successfully surrounded the Black Ink clan and were now slowly but steadily eliminating them. It was ironic that the Black Ink clan army's plan was being carried out by the humans instead. Once the equilibrium between the two sides was broken, death was the only fate awaiting the Black Ink clan. One by one, the pseudo-royal lords died, and once they were all gone, the territory lords were next. Then, the feudal lords. The battle lasted for a dozen days before it finally came to a close. Now that it was over, the humans began focusing on their recuperation as they counted the casualties. The Purple Feather Army had suffered catastrophic losses. This was the biggest loss for the human race in this battle. Most of the casualties occurred when the Purple Feather Army was holding down the Black Ink clan army before the other armies arrived. A heavy price had to be paid for an army to hold out against an enemy 10 times its size. Nevertheless, it was a worthwhile price to pay. Due to the various setups and arrangements made prior to the battle, the humans were able to kill every single one of the reinforcement army that came out of the Primordial Heavens source Grand Restriction. They had completely wiped out the threat that this reinforcement army could have posed. Once the battle ended, Yang Kai released the Grand Array that suppressed and sealed the local space, and at the same time, the 12 universe fragments that had been turned into array nodes shattered into dust as well. It was the backlash from the strength of the spirit array, and even Yang Kai could not stop that from happening. The Ninth Order Masters gathered back at Pure Yang Pass. Many of them were injured, especially the 3 from Purple Feather Army. Mi Jingluan, who was seated at the helm, had a worried expression. "You wish to go on ahead first, junior brother?" Yang Kai had just announced to the group that he intended to leave first and head for the Primordial Heavens source Grand Restriction. He nodded and said, "Something must have happened at the Primordial Heavens source Grand Restriction, so I want to go and take a look. Furthermore, we don't know what's happening with the suppressing Black Ink army either." The humans had too little intel on their hands. The only thing Yang Kai could be sure of was that the Primordial Heavens source Grand Restriction had not been broken yet, as true royal lords would have appeared as well if it did. However, he was worried about the suppressing Black Ink army's predicament. They were a team of elite masters who were in charge of dealing with the Black Ink clan, who escaped from the Grand Restriction to ease the pressure on Wuquang. The army of over 10 million that had escaped was too much for the suppressing Black Ink army alone to have stopped, so it was inevitable that some terrible fate had befallen them. Mi Jingluan and the others knew that many of Yang Kai's family and disciples were part of the suppressing Black Ink army, so they understood what he was feeling right now. As it was, Yang Kai had already shown a great deal of righteousness when he chose to remain here and fight with the rest of the human race army, despite knowing that the Black Ink clan's reinforcement army had escaped from the Primordial Heavens source Grand Restriction. Mi Jingluan thus spoke up. Since their reinforcement army escaped from the Grand Restriction, things would not be peaceful there. I'm sure there would be enemy forces outside the Grand Restriction as well. How can you go up against them alone, junior brother? Why don't you wait a few days and head out with the rest of the army? It won't be long. Just 10 days will do. Yang Kai shook his head. Everyone has just been through an arduous battle, and though it was not the most intense we've experienced, everyone is exhausted. 10 days won't be enough to recover. They'll need to rest and recuperate for longer than that. Also, if I head over alone, I can hide my tracks and act according to the situation. Seeing as how Mi Jingluan wanted to continue talking him out of it, Yang Kai added, I'll take some of the Void Guard with me and finish setting up the space arrays along the way. We're only a few years distance away from the primordial heavens source grand restriction. So once the space arrays have finished being arranged, everyone should more, or less have recovered as well, and it would be just in time for them to proceed. This is the best arrangement, senior brother. Mi Jingluan had more to say, but in the end he nodded in agreement. You're right, but it will be hard on you, junior brother. I'm just doing what I must. Yang Kai got to his feet. I'll go and make the preparations. In reality, there was not much he needed to prepare. He simply got Li Wu Yi to select a group of Void Guards who would be leaving with him before sealing up Pure Yang Pass, and the two giant spirit gods. Both Pure Yang Pass and the giant spirit gods were massive and could not be sent through the space arrays in their original forms. Yang Kai had to seal them inside a world bead to accomplish that. The 12 universe fragments he used earlier had turned to dust, but thankfully there was no lack of universe fragments in the void. As such, Yang Kai randomly moved one over and placed Pure Yang Pass as well as the two giant spirit gods on it. Then, with the use of space principles, he refined it into a world bead and passed it to Mi Jingluan for safekeeping. Once everything was settled, Yang Kai took 20 Void Guard into his small universe before stepping out into the void. He kept moving onward without stopping at all. The emotions that Yang Kai had been suppressing for the past 6 months finally welled up again. He desperately wanted to hurry on over to the primordial heavens source grand restriction as soon as possible and see what was happening for himself. Several days later, he stopped and opened the portal to his small universe, bringing 2 Void Guards out. I'll leave things here to you, Yang Kai said before carrying on with his journey. The 2 Void Guard sent him off with a bow, and once he was gone, they began setting up the space array. A few days later, Yang Kai let out 2 more Void Guards. This scene repeated itself all along the way as the Void Guard arranged the space arrays that would lead to the primordial heavens source grand restriction. In just over a month, Yang Kai traversed across the late ancient era battlefield and arrived at the spiritless land. It was an empty void with no trace of life. Even the strength of the void, which could literally be found anywhere in the universe, was incredibly weak here. Yang Kai was extremely close to the primordial heaven source grand restriction now. All he had to do was travel a little further, and he would arrive at the grand restriction, which had been in existence for millions of years. His small universe opened up, and Li Wu Yi and another Void Guard stepped out. They were the last 2. Set up the space array here, but don't travel any further ahead. Remember to stay hidden and not let the Black Ink Clan discover you, Yang Kai instructed. Li Wu Yi and the other Void Guard nodded. I'm heading off, Yang Kai said before disappearing into the distance. Pushing his space principles to their maximum potential, Yang Kai arrived outside the primordial heavens source grand restriction in just 3 days, and the sight he saw made his expression grim. It was just as Mi Jingluan had predicted. A large number of masters from the Black Ink Clan were gathered outside the opening in the primordial heavens source grand restriction, with many pseudoroyal lords among them. There seemed to be even more of them here than there had been with the reinforcement army that had just been wiped out. Right now, they were ceaselessly attacking the primordial heavens source grand restriction from the outside. There was no telling how long they had been doing this. The endless waves of attacks caused ripples in the grand restriction, and though it was not in any danger of breaking yet, it would clearly not hold out for long. What's more, there was no sign of the suppressing Black Ink army. Yang Kai's heart sank. As he moved forward, he kept searching for signs of the suppressing Black Ink army, but he had yet to discover anything. It was an extremely worrying situation. The suppressing Black Ink army was made up of thousands of the most elite masters of the human race. Not only did it include Yang Shui, a new Ninth Order master, but also Fu Guang, who was a divine dragon. Furthermore, they had the help of the suppressing Black Ink Fortress, so even if they could not defeat the Black Ink clan, they should have been able to escape. However, Yang Kai saw no trace of them as he made his way over, and when he arrived, he did not see any sign of them either. He did not find any human bodies or the wreckage of the suppressing Black Ink Fortress in the void. It was as if the suppressing Black Ink army and the suppressing Black Ink Fortress had simply up and vanished. Yang Kai did not know what happened to the suppressing Black Ink army, and the only source of information available to him was Wu Kuang, who was standing guard at the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. I hope he's still alive. Yang Kai silently prayed as he used Thunder Shadow's innate divine ability before approaching the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. He avoided the Black Ink clan army and arrived at a different part outside the Grand Restriction before using his divine sense. Time seemed to stretch on as he nervously waited, but at last the familiar voice rang out in his mind. "You finally came." Wu Kuang sounded weak and exhausted. "Didn't you say you'd come over now and then to check up on things? It's been so long since your last visit that I thought you died. Something unexpected happened, and I couldn't use my special method to reach this place," Yang Kai helplessly explained. The old tree had fallen into a coma after bringing Yang Kai back to the grand ancient ruins boundary from an extraordinary distance away, so Yang Kai could not use the power of the old tree to shuttle through the void. Otherwise, he would not have waited until this day to come over. "What happened? Where's the suppressing Black Ink army?" Yang Kai frantically asked. "It's a bit complicated." Wu Kuang did not know how to explain. "Take a look for yourself." He then transmitted a bunch of information over, and after looking through everything, Yang Kai's expression grew strange too. No wonder Wu Kuang said it's complicated. It's not at all what I expected. The only thing he was glad about was that the suppressing Black Ink army was safe. For now, this was unexpected good news. Yang Kai figured that, at best, the suppressing Black Ink army had been defeated by the Black Ink clan and had to flee, but the worst-case scenario was that they had all been killed, and that was not an outcome he could accept. However, based on what Wu Kuang shared with him now, the suppressing Black Ink army situation was far better than he had initially thought. Furthermore, the information Yang Kai just received was something that neither he nor any of the other humans would have thought of. "I only discovered these things when the Black Ink strength exploded this time. I didn't detect any of them before." Mu was indeed the strongest of the 10 from the late ancient era, Wu Kuang declared with a tone of admiration. The fact that someone like Wu Kuang expressed such thoughts proved just how remarkable Mu's plans and methods had been. Yang Kai was just as stunned by the information he received from Wu Kuang. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 59-25. Inside the Grand Restriction, Marshall Peak Tsang and the other 9 martial ancestors from the late ancient era chose to set up the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction in this place because it was where the primordial light and darkness were born. It could be considered the place where Mo came from. All the humans knew that Mo was suppressed and sealed inside the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. However, no one knew what it was like inside the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. Even Tsang and the others knew very little. Out of the 10 martial ancestors from the late ancient era, Mu was the only one who personally entered the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction to see what it was like inside. Nevertheless, when she returned, she chose to sacrifice herself by merging with the Grand Restriction to strengthen it. She did not speak of what she saw or encountered inside. The human race masters came up with their own theories about what was inside the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction, and Yang Kai had done the same as well. All along, he assumed that the Grand Restriction was simply Mo's cage. It suppressed and sealed Mo, as well as its creations. After all, Mo was an existence that embodied chaos and evil, the source of all misfortunes that befell all of existence. Even if Mo had no wish to be so, Its existence was sadly the antithesis of other living beings. However, from the looks of it now, the situation was a lot more complex than Yang Kai had thought. Despite everything else Yang Kai had gone through before, he could not help but be dazed by this new information. Still, there's no point in getting to know these things now. Wu Kuang's feeble voice rang out in Yang Kai's head once more. The primordial heavens source grand restriction has been in place for too long. For the past 6 months, the Black Ink clan has consistently attacked it, so I'm afraid it won't hold out much longer. After a pause, he said, Yang Kai, if you wish to save the suppressing Black Ink army, I can send you in. You can find a chance to bring them out again, though, if I'm being honest, I don't think there's much hope of that. If you don't, then leave now. Once the grand restriction breaks open, MO will fully awaken, and there will no longer be a place free from it anymore. It hasn't come to that yet, Yang Kai quietly replied. Plus, it's just as you said, if MO does wake up, it will be impossible to find an uncorrupted place. So, where would I run to? As he spoke, he recalled his previous plan. If the humans could not defeat the Black Ink clan, their only option was to gather their strength and flee deep into the void to find a new home. The universe furnace was constantly splitting heaven and earth apart, so there had to be more than one livable environment in the vast universe. No matter how strong Black Ink's strength was, it would not be able to cover the entirety of existence. However, if it did come to that, not only would it mean that only a few could escape, but even those who did would have to wander aimlessly for the rest of their lives. This was not what Yang Kai wanted to see. Don't despair. The human race army will be arriving soon enough, and when the time comes, they'll be able to get rid of the Black Ink clan forces outside the Grand Restriction, Yang Kai consoled. Wu Kuang was startled. The humans are on their second crusade already? Yang Kai nodded. More than 20 years ago, we reclaimed the 3,000 worlds, and half a year ago, we took back the no-return pass. A month ago, we dealt with the Black Ink clan's reinforcements that emerged from the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction. Our army is currently reorganizing itself, and will be here soon. Wu Kuang was a little dazed. Has the human race's heritage grown that strong? When he saw Yang Kai appear here alone, he assumed that it was only Yang Kai who would be coming, so he did not expect to resolve the crisis he had on his hands right now. After all, the Black Ink clan army attacking him numbered over 10 million, though they did not have a single royal lord among them. Yang Kai could not take them on all by himself. Our heritage is stronger now than it has ever been, Yang Kai seriously declared. Even though they only had around 30 Ninth Order Masters now, in the future, they would have at least 10 times what they had at their peak, if not 100 times. What fortuitous news, Wu Kuang remarked with a joyful voice. There was more he wanted to say, but all of a sudden he exclaimed, Damn it! The suppressing Black Ink army is in trouble. Let me deal with it first. As soon as Wu Kuang finished speaking, Yang Kai could no longer sense the former's aura as he had gone to deal with the situation the suppressing Black Ink army was in. Yang Kai stood in place with his aura and figure hidden as he watched the Black Ink clan army. They were standing at the gap and persistently attacking the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction. Yang Kai had a hard time stopping himself from jumping into action. He was all alone, so even if he attacked the Black Ink clan army, he could not deal with so many of them, and he would also end up putting the Black Ink clan on high alert because he exposed his presence. All that could be done now was to have Wu Kuang hold out a little while longer. The human race army would soon be here, and once they would be able to deal with this army. After giving it some thought, Yang Kai took out a jade slip and engraved all of the information he had into it. Then he took out a space beacon and used it to deliver the jade slip over to Li Wuyi. Thus, by having Li Wuyi pass the message along, the others would soon receive the reports about the situation over here, and Mi Jingluan would be able to make appropriate arrangements. Around a quarter hour later, Yang Kai felt Wu Kuang's aura again, and he quickly asked, How are things? They're safe for now, but it won't stay that way for long, Wu Kuang replied. It's all thanks to the fact that a large number of the Black Ink clansmen left the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction, and the rest are focused on the opening right now. Otherwise, the suppressing Black Ink army would surely be facing an even bigger crisis. Yang Kai nodded. I'll have to leave the suppressing Black Ink army in your care then. When can the human race army arrive? Wu Kuang asked. They would have set off by now, so it should take less than a month for them to arrive. That's good to hear. Wu Kuang exhaled at last. Before Yang Kai came over, Wu Kuang had to fight a dire battle all on his own here. Not only did he have to protect the entire suppressing Black Ink army, but he also had to focus on maintaining the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. He was beginning to despair at the situation. At last, Yang Kai had come, and the human race army would be here in a month as well. They would be able to deal with the Black Ink clan army outside the Grand Restriction, and he would have a much easier time once they did. What do you plan on doing now? Wu Kuang asked. After thinking in silence for a moment, Yang Kai replied, Send me to the suppressing Black Ink army. It's been so many years, so they must have used up all of their resources by now. Although Yang Kai did leave a lot of resources with the suppressing Black Ink army, when he first sent them to the Primordial Heaven Source Grand Restriction, it had been thousands of years since then, and they had no way of replenishing their supplies. They had to have used it all up by now after all these years of clashing with the Black Ink clan. Good, Wu Kuang said. Follow my lead. Yang Kai nodded and followed the signals that Wu Kuang gave, which led him deeper into the void. Soon, once he arrived at a different location outside the Grand Restriction, Wu Kuang's voice rang out again. This is where the Grand Restriction is at its weakest. The innate territory lords escaped from here back then. Yang Kai recalled this point clearly. Before the universe furnace emerged, a large number of innate territory lords had snuck out of the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. Yang Kai inadvertently found out about this and rushed over to kill them off. Rivers of blood marked his path, and in the end he came over and informed Wu Kuang about this, which was how the latter managed to repair the breach. Since this breach could be repaired, it could also be opened up again. You'll only have one breath of time to enter the Grand Restriction. Don't miss it, Wu Kuang instructed. Despite being in control of the Primordial Heaven Source Grand Restriction, he did not want to let any breach stay open for too long. It was safest to do so for only a breath, as something unforeseen could happen if it were open any longer. Got it, Yang Kai answered. The very next instant, he saw a crack in the Grand Restriction. Black Ink strength poured out of the crack that was filled with an evil and chaotic aura. The crack opened up for just a brief moment before it sealed back up again. Yang Kai, who was initially outside the Grand Restriction, was nowhere to be seen now. Never-ending Black Ink strength surrounded Yang Kai as everything was plunged into utter darkness. Yang Kai stood amidst it all with his aura and figure hidden as he looked around. He could not see anything with his eyes, so he had to rely on his divine sense to scout his surroundings. All cultivators, including Ninth Order Masters, would lose their sight and sense of hearing in a place like this, and if they used their divine sense, they were opening themselves to the possibility of being corrupted by Black Ink strength. Thankfully, Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus to protect him, so he did not have to worry about anything when using his divine sense. He instantly detected a mysterious energy protecting him, one that was like a thin layer of mist that enveloped him completely. Although it was his first time coming into contact with this energy, he was able to instantly deduce what it was. This was the power of the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. Wu Kuang was in control over the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction, and his cultivation had steadily grown over the years. Even though he was not as strong as Tsang, who used to stand guard here yet, he was not that much weaker. Thus, he could use the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction to protect Yang Kai, and ensure that the latter would not be detected by the Black Ink clan inside the Grand Restriction. Otherwise, even if Yang Kai used Thunder Shadow's innate divine ability, he would still run the risk of exposing himself, as he was inside an environment filled with black ink strength. If something that was in the middle of a sea of black ink strength moved, the movement would cause ripples in it the same way it would in water. Based on what Wu Kuang told Yang Kai, the former had relied on the power of the Grand Restriction to keep the suppressing black ink army safe. All this while, if it had not been for that, the suppressing black ink army would not have survived till this day after being swallowed up into the Grand Restriction. They would have been ripped into pieces the moment they ended up inside. Wu Kuang's voice rang out in Yang Kai's mind. Don't move. The Black Ink clan is approaching. At the same time, Yang Kai sensed a group of powerful auras coming over. He quickly withdrew his divine sense and stayed hidden in silence. Moments later, the group of powerful auras arrived. It was a group of innate territory lords led by a royal lord. They came over after sensing that something unusual occurred earlier. The royal lord immediately went over to the spot where Yang Kai snuck into the Grand Restriction and studied it with his divine sense before looking around. A territory lord also came over to inspect the spot, and soon he reported, "Sir, there are signs that the breach had weakened earlier." Oh. The royal lord's expression was stern as he made a more thorough check. Once he confirmed that it was true, his expression turned to one of glee. This breach once opened up nearly 1,000 years ago. Since it has weakened, it won't be long before it opens up again. After a pause, he sneered. That scoundrel must be stretched thin right now. He immediately barked out an order. Get the word out. We must find that human army as soon as possible and occupy that bastard's attention. Yes, sir. The innate territory lords responded at once. Then, the royal lord selected 2 innate territory lords. You 2 will stay here and keep an eye on the breach. If anything strange happens, report back to me right away. Yes, sir. Marshal Peak. Marshal Peak, Chapter 5926, Suppressing Black Ink Army. Marshal Peak, 2 innate territory lords stayed back to keep an eye on things while the other masters from the Black Ink clan left as quickly as they came. Yang Kai, who was still in hiding, cocked his brow and transmitted to Wu Kuang, "What a unique nickname you have there." "I interacted with the royal lords here a couple of times when I was bored," Wu Kuang quipped. "I made a strong impression on them." Yang Kai had nothing to say to that. Standing guard over the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction for thousands of years was indeed a lonely, monotonous task. Making contact with the royal lords would not only relieve some stress, but would also be a chance to glean useful information. "I'll take you over to the suppressing Black Ink army." "Don't resist," Wu Kuang's voice rang out. Yang Kai hummed in acknowledgement. At the very next breath, he felt a strange energy enveloping him and whisking him through the endless black ink strength. Yang Kai was moved silently and unnoticeably. Occasionally, he could sense strong auras flitting past him. These belonged to the royal lords, but somehow, with the help of the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction's power, he could move past them without being detected. At last, Yang Kai felt as if he had broken through a layer of some sort and entered a different space. The darkness disappeared at once. This space was not filled with black ink strength. It was a fairly small area where speckles of light could be seen. Yang Kai followed the light and saw the suppressing black ink fortress. Glowing pearls hung atop the suppressing black ink fortress and gave off the soft light that Yang Kai saw. A group of people was waiting expectantly on the suppressing black ink fortress. They had heard the news from Wu Kuang in advance and knew Yang Kai was coming. Yang Kai moved over to the suppressing black ink fortress, and soon he landed in front of the group. He let out a small exhale of relief as his eyes took in the crowd. Then he bowed in greeting to the silver-haired man in front. Senior, Wu Kuang borrowed the strength of the Grand Restriction to create this space. It was largely protected from the Black Ink clan's eyes, and that was why the suppressing Black Ink army was able to remain inside for so long without being annihilated. As it was a small space, Fu Guang did not use his dragon form but remained in his human form instead. Fu Guang raised his hand and said, "We can skip the formalities. It is unfortunate that you had to see us in this awkward predicament." Yang Kai shook his head. "It is I who failed to plan properly. All of you have suffered greatly for the past few years, Senior. We all share the responsibility of vanquishing the Black Ink clan." Fu Guang waved his hand before asking, "How are things out there?" Wu Kuang had informed them that Yang Kai was coming, but he did not give them an update about the situation beyond the Grand Restriction. So Fu Guang could not help but feel a bit concerned. The suppressing Black Ink army was in charge of standing guard over the opening in the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction. They had been sucked into the Grand Restriction during an earlier commotion, and without them, a large number of masters from the Black Ink clan had escaped from the breach. That would surely be a blow to the humans in the 3,000 worlds. "We have reclaimed the 3,000 worlds," Yang Kai declared. "All of the Black Ink clansmen there have been wiped out. The human race army is currently making its way over and will arrive at the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction in about a month." "Oh." Fu Guang's spirits soared at once. "We have reclaimed the 3,000 worlds." Everyone else was thrilled by the news. They had been positioned outside the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction for years now, and never got a chance to make contact with the others back home, so they were completely unaware of what was happening. The lack of information was torturous for the suppressing Black Ink army. They did not know how much longer they had to stand watch here. Now that they heard the 3,000 worlds had been reclaimed, they felt a heavy burden lifted off their shoulders. A large number of masters escaped from the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction. So we realized that something must have happened at the Grand Restriction, which is why I came over first to see what the situation was, Yang Kai added. Fu Guang nodded. A few years ago, the Grand Restriction had a sudden burst of instability. The suppressing Black Ink army failed to withdraw in time, so we were sucked inside. We're only able to survive this long thanks to Wu Kuang's protection. Nevertheless, even though Wu Kuang used the power of the Grand Restriction to hide the suppressing Black Ink army's tracks to keep them out of sight from the Black Ink clan, they were still doomed if they could not think of a way to escape this predicament. Wu Kuang could keep them safe for now, but he could not do so forever. This was Mo's domain, and it was filled with its energy and creations. Now and then, the suppressing Black Ink army would inadvertently let out a trace of their existence, and the Black Ink clan would mount a siege. In fact, it had happened just a while ago, and Wu Kuang had to rush over to rescue them. All of a sudden, Wu Kuang's voice rang out. "Once the human race army comes along to keep the Black Ink clan occupied, I'll find a chance to deliver all of you out of here." He could not make an attempt now. For one, there were over 10 million Black Ink clansmen outside the Grand Restriction, so the suppressing Black Ink army would be slaughtered the moment they showed up. Furthermore, within the Grand Restriction, a large number of masters from the Black Ink clan were lying in wait near the opening as well. The Black Ink clan knew that there was a human race army inside the Grand Restriction, and there was also only one opening that allowed passage out of the Grand Restriction. By guarding that spot, they made it impossible for the humans to escape. If the suppressing Black Ink army wanted to leave safely, they had to wait until the human race army arrived. Once the battle broke out, they would get their chance to leave. Before that, they would have to remain under Wu Kuang's watchful protection. After getting more information about the outside world from Yang Kai, Fu Guang began to feel more assured. "Oh, right. I brought some resources, Senior." Yang Kai took out a small pile of space rings from his small universe. After seizing the no-return pass, the humans managed to restock their supplies. The Black Ink clan had gathered a great number of resources during their occupation and failed to destroy them in the hasty battle, so the resources naturally fell into the humans' hands. Yang Kai had stored a lot of resources in his small universe for his own ease of use, so he could now pass them over to the suppressing Black Ink army. Fu Guang accepted the space rings and nodded lightly. Resources are indeed in short supply, so I'll take these. Yang Kai felt ashamed. I should have dealt with this issue sooner, but something unexpected happened a while back, and I could no longer come over any time I wanted. Fu Guang nodded once more. He then glanced at Yu Rumeng at the others who were standing to the side, and thoughtfully announced, I'll go and hand out the resources to the others first. Many thanks, Senior. Soon, the only ones remaining were Yang Kai and his family. He looked at the women and saw Yu Rumeng, Su Yan, Shanqing Luo, Zhu Qing, Shuiyu, Jiyao Chu Huashang, and Tao Lingwan. Everyone was here apart from Xianing Chang, who had to remain in the star boundary as a great grandmaster alchemist. You all must have had a hard time, Yang Kai said, ashamed. When the suppressing Black Ink army had been formed, Mi Jingluan wanted these women to join it. At the time, intense fights were happening across the great territory battlefields, and the situation out there was incredibly dangerous. On the other hand, the suppressing Black Ink army was only in charge of standing guard over the Grand Restriction, so the risks were much lower. Mi Jingluan had done so as a favor to Yang Kai. Alas, even Mi Jingluan could not predict the changes that would happen many years later. He did not expect the suppressing Black Ink army would end up in such a crisis. He never would have thought that they would be sucked into the Grand Restriction and run the risk of being exterminated if they did not have Wu Kuang's protection. Mi Jingluan had been under a lot of pressure when he heard that the situation at the Primordial Heaven Source Grand Restriction had changed and the suppressing Black Ink army could be in a disastrous situation. He did not know how he was going to face Yang Kai if the suppressing Black Ink army had been annihilated. Everyone is having a hard time right now, not just us. Yu Rumeng took Yang Kai's hand and gently held it. Her voice was soft as she soothed. You don't need to worry about us. We're all together, and we can look out for one another. You just need to focus on what you have to do. Su Yan spoke up next. That's right. We are a part of the army and doing our part to eradicate the Black Ink clan. We're not weak flowers that need constant protection. You don't need to worry too much about us. Shan Qing Luo smiled. As long as you don't think that we're a burden, husband. Yang Kai chuckled. Why would I think you're a burden? You're all my most precious treasures. Ji Yao and the more reserved women immediately blushed at how frank Yang Kai was, but their gazes softened with affection. Yang Kai's 3 legacy disciples were gathered nearby as well. Su Yi was looking at Yang Kai with a look of admiration as he exclaimed, That's our honored master. All right, he's indeed amazing. Looks like I'll have to work hard to follow in his footsteps. A sharp hiss suddenly rang out. Su Yi hastily turned around. What's the matter? Eldest senior brother. Zhao Yibai had been the one who gasped. Zhao Yibai was rubbing his waist as he stared innocently at Zhaoya. Why did you pinch me, Zhaoya? No reason. I just felt like pinching you. Zhaoya huffed. Oh. Su Yi eyed Zhao Yibai pitifully, but in the end, he could not resist giving a reminder. Eldest senior brother, as honored master's first disciple, you should learn from him and live up to his expectations. Zhao Yibai gave it some serious thought and nodded. You're right. I've reached a bottleneck in my cultivation of the Tao of space. This is a rare opportunity. I must ask honored master for some guidance later. Su Yi gaped and realized his eldest senior brother was a hopeless case as he muttered, The Grand Tao isn't the only thing you can learn from honored master. Eldest senior brother, why did you pinch me again, Xiaoya? It makes me happy. And There were endless thoughts and feelings of longing to express now that the long-awaited reunion had finally occurred. Still, it was not the time or place to dwell on such things. The women were wise and sensible enough, so once they all had a brief chat with Yang Kai, Yu Meng led them away. Yang Kai fell into a reverie as he watched them leave. "Big brother," Yang Shue's voice called out next. She and others like Zhao Yibai had been waiting to the side the whole time and only came over once Yu Meng and the other wives left. "A adoptive father," Yang Shao called out as well. Yang Kai turned around and smiled at Yang Shui. He stroked her head as he said, "Your big brother has spent all this time running around everywhere and rarely had a moment to stop to take a break. I've always considered it a pity that I couldn't spend time with you when you were young. Please don't hold it against me." Yang Shui grinned and said, "I wouldn't, of course. Ever since I was a child, I knew that you were destined for great things, big brother. Mother and father praised you all the time, and when I was young, I dreamed about becoming someone like you. Based on cultivation alone, I think I've done well enough." Then she lifted her chin slightly and added, "You need to work harder, big brother. Don't let your little sister surpass you." Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 59:27. Guidance. Marshall Peak. Yang Kai chuckled. "I do need to work harder from now on." After the light-hearted chat, both Yang Kai and Yang Shui felt warm with familial love. Yang Kai finally turned to Yang Shao, who had been standing on the side all along. "Adoptive father." Yang Shao stood rigidly with sweat beading across his forehead. Yang Kai narrowed his eyes. "Are you feeling extremely nervous?" "Of course not. Never." Yang Shao denied it at once. "My heart is leaping with joy at the fact that I get to see you when we're in such a challenging situation." "Adoptive father." Yang Kai scoffed. Yang Shao jumped a little. "Spend more time on your cultivation so that you become a divine dragon as soon as possible," Yang Kai instructed after eyeing Yang Shao for a while. "Yes, I won't let you down," Yang Shao firmly declared. "Go on." Yang Kai waved his hand. Yang Shui began leading away a stiff Yang Shao, but all of a sudden she turned back around and reminded, "Make sure you be careful, big brother." Perhaps the connection they shared due to their bloodline allowed her to sense that Yang Kai was about to do something dangerous, so she had a look of worry on her face. Yang Kai nodded. "You both take good care of yourselves, too." After watching Yang Shui and Yang Shao leave, Yang Kai turned back to his three disciples. "Greetings, honored master." All three of them kneeled and bowed in greeting. Yang Kai accepted the bow before lifting his hand. "You may rise." Zhao Yibai and the other two stood up. Yang Kai had a faint smile as his eyes flitted over the three. All of the disciples from the Void Dao Temple could be said to have inherited his mantle and were proficient in the cultivation of various grand Daos. Thus, all of the cultivators from Void Dao Temple could be considered his disciples. However, only these three in front of him truly inherited his legacy. It was not that Yang Kai held back when he taught others his Daos, but Zhao Yibai and the other two were the only ones who formally underwent the ritual to become his disciples. They each inherited one of the grand Daos that Yang Kai was most focused on, and all along he had high hopes for them. Based on their achievement over the years, they did not let him down, nor did they waste their talents. "Are you about to break through to the next order?" Yang Kai suddenly realized there was something amiss about their aura. All three of them seemed to be suppressed by some kind of energy, and they were also doing their best to rein themselves in. Zhao Yibai replied, "Reporting to honored master, we will be breaking through soon." But Senior Wu Kuang said that as the suppressing Black Ink army is currently in hiding, we shouldn't make too much of a commotion. So he had Senior Fu Guang put some seals on us to delay our breakthrough. Yang Kai nodded lightly. That was wise. The suppressing black ink army was in a difficult spot right now, and just covering their tracks alone took up a sizable amount of Wu Kuang's attention. If Zhao Yibai and the others had their breakthroughs now, there was a high chance that the humans would be exposed, and they would be caught. However, from the looks of it, their breakthrough was happening just as Yang Kai had predicted. They would have undoubtedly become Ninth Order Masters by now if they had not been sucked into the primordial heavens source grand restriction. Both they and the suppressing black ink army would have received a great boost in power. Come, I do have some knowledge to share regarding the breakthrough to the Ninth Order Open Heaven realm. Now's my chance to share it with you. Yang Kai took out a few futons from his small universe and tossed them onto the ground for him and his disciples to sit on. Zhao Yibai and the others quickly sat down to listen carefully to Yang Kai's advice, although Yang Shui had shared some of her knowledge with them. Every master who ascended to the Ninth Order would encounter slightly different situations, so it was still beneficial for them to listen to their honored master's teachings. After sharing some pointers and things to look out for when becoming a Ninth Order Master, Yang Kai used his divine sense to confer with Wu Kuang. He was in a good mood as he asked, "It's rare for us to have some spare time on our hands. Do any of you have any difficulties in your cultivation that you need assistance with?" All three of them became spirited at once, but Zhao Yibai was the first to speak. "Honored Master, this disciple seems to have hit a bottleneck in the Tao of space and wants to seek guidance from you." Yang Kai nodded. "Use some of your space principles. Let me take a look." Zhao Yibai immediately did as he was told. When Yang Kai sensed the movement of space principles, he raised his brow in pleasant surprise. When it came to cultivation aptitude, Zhao Yibai was the weakest of Yang Kai's three disciples. In fact, he was weaker than most of the disciples from the Void Tao Temple. There was only one reason why he was able to get this far in his martial Tao, and that was because he had overwhelming compatibility with space principles, as if he had been born to cultivate the Tao of space. Yang Kai had taken Zhao Yibai as his disciple because when the former had been wandering around in his small universe, he sensed that Zhao Yibai, who was still in his mother's womb at the time, had formed a connection with Yang Kai's space Tao essence. At the time, Zhao Yibai had not even been born yet. A cultivator who had an innate connection with a grand Tao would surely be able to cultivate that grand Tao a lot more easily than others. The compatibility between this cultivator and the grand Tao would be far above everyone else's. Zhao Yibai's compatibility with the Tao of space was able to make up for what he lacked in general cultivation aptitude. Based on Yang Kai's categorization of Grand Tao Mastery, Zhao Yibai was currently at the peak of the 7th level, just one step away from the 8th level. This was incredibly rare. Usually, only fully grown phoenixes would be at this level, but those of the Phoenix clan were born with a natural advantage as the Tao of space was their bloodline talent, making it far easier for them to cultivate it. Li Wu was probably the only other human to reach this level as well, but Li Wu had been cultivating for much longer than Zhao Yibai. Yang Kai even felt that if he cultivated normally, he would not be as proficient as Zhao Yibai was. His own elevated mastery of the Grand Taos was mainly due to the benefits he received from the Great Sea, celestial phenomenon, and the infinite river. He had refined a lot of pure Tao strengths from these two mysterious places, and that had enabled his proficiency over the various Grand Taos to soar greatly. When it came to higher levels of individual Grand Taos, words conveyed very little, so after a moment of silent thought, Yang Kai manipulated space principles to elucidate some mysteries to Zhao Yibai. Zhao Yibai watched attentively. After a long silence, he declared, "Your incredible, honored master. This disciple is in awe." Yang Kai's display was akin to breaking the Tao of space down into minute details and showing Zhao Yibai the deepest, innermost mysteries. Due to Zhao Yibai's compatibility with the Tao of space, he was able to learn a lot from this alone. The new knowledge and understanding flooded Zhao Yibai's mind, and he was confident that a brief retreat of focused cultivation would be enough for him to break through his bottleneck and allow his mastery of this grand Tao to ascend to a new level. Though he was eager to do so immediately, he could not under these circumstances, so he had to quell his desire. Now that Yang Kai was done with his eldest disciple, he turned to his second disciple, Zhao Ye. She got to her feet at once and waved her hand in the air to produce a long spear. "Please instruct me, honored master." The spear Tao could not be taught the same way the Tao of space had been. It could only be transmitted through battle. Yang Kai smiled. "Attack me." Zhao Yi Bai and Su Yi's expressions changed as they quickly scrambled out of their seats in front of Yang Kai and hurried to the side. Yang Kai was startled by their reaction, but soon his gaze hardened. All at once, an alarming murderous intent loomed over him, and in the very next instant, the tip of a spear drew near. He raised his hand and lightly flicked away Zhao Ye's spear. Nevertheless, Zhao Ye did not stop there. She kept attacking with her spear, time and time again with quick, relentless strikes. Zhao Ye seemed like an entirely different person when she had her spear in hand. Her presence became incredibly dominating. Her spear technique showed traces of the supreme limitless spear, but most of it was a product of her many years of accumulation and practice. In fact, Yang Kai could sense that she could very well surpass him when it came to the spear Tao, which left him feeling rather helpless. Only an impossibly dangerous environment could produce such an alarming spear technique, which was not something to be pleased about. Zhao Ye was afraid to cause too much of a commotion, so she did not use her world force or her Tao's strength. She simply relied on pure technique. Her murderous intent did not decrease, though. It was as if she were going up against a hated enemy she could never be reconciled with instead of Yang Kai, her honored master. Yang Kai finally realized why Zhao Yi Bai and Su Yi had reacted the way they did earlier. They must have experienced the imposing aura of Zhao Ye's spear themselves and knew to stay clear. "Zhao Ye, you do indeed have great mastery over the spear and its techniques, but your murderous intent is too strong." Zhao Ye continued to lunge and withdraw her spear as she flitted around Yang Kai. Her spear loomed over the small area as she asked, "The spear Tao is focused on domination and slaughter. How am I supposed to kill the enemy if my murderous intent isn't strong?" "You do need strong murderous intent, but too much of it isn't a good thing. It's good to strike fear in the enemy even before the battle. It makes it even easier to kill them off. If you run into an enemy who's either weaker or of similar strength to you, you can indeed use your murderous intent to intimidate them. But what will you do if you run into an enemy stronger than you?" "I won't give up until I kill them." Yang Kai shook his head. "Zhao Ye, it's true that spear Tao is used offensively, but you need to get one thing clear. Are you using your spear to kill or to protect?" Zhao Ye did not understand. "Please enlighten me, honored master." "One spear can be used to kill the enemy, but it can also be used to protect lives." Yang Kai blocked Zhao Ye's attack with his hand before reaching into the air. His voice continued, "The persistent focus on killing will only lead one's heart astray. Everyone has something they wish to protect, and that gives them strength to persist." Zhao Ye was confused. "How can I protect anyone if I don't kill the enemy? Killing off all my enemies is the only way to protect what I am determined to protect." "And what do you want to protect?" Yang Kai asked as he brought out his azure dragon spear. "I want to protect." Zhao Ye's dazed eyes grew bright again as her gaze swept over the spot where Zhao Yi Bai was standing intently. She then shot a quick glance at Su Yi as well. Su Yi keenly sensed this and grumbled, "Hey, eldest senior brother, why do I feel like I'm just included as an afterthought?" "Huh? What?" Zhao Yi Bai turned to ask. As he spoke, though, he felt a sudden chill grip his heart as the aura of death swept over him. Before he could react, he heard Zhao Ye's heart-wrenching shriek. "No, Zhao Yi turned around and saw his honored master, enveloped by black ink strength, a genuine black ink disciple flying over at him with his spear ready to strike. Marshall Peak, that you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.